If there's one jurisdiction that carries more weight than any other in the fund world, it's Delaware. It's not the cheapest, it's not the most flexible, and if you're not US based, it adds complexity. But here's the thing, Delaware is the benchmark. It's the standard that LPs, especially American institutions, measure every other jurisdiction against. When an LP sees Delaware on your fund documents, they're not just seeing a legal structure, they're seeing a commitment to fiduciary duty, investor protection, and enforceable governance. This is part 4 of a 6-part series on fund domiciles and what LPs really see when they look at your jurisdiction. Today we're breaking down Delaware, the gold standard, why it matters, and when you should consider it even if you're not based in the United States. Let's get into it. I'm Corey, a lawyer helping entrepreneurs decode law, technology, and innovation. In today's video, we're continuing our series on how LPs interpret fund domiciles and why your jurisdiction choice matters more than ever in 2026. Here's what we're covering today. First, why Delaware became the fiduciary gold standard and why that reputation endures. Then what LPs actually see when they see Delaware and why it carries so much weight with US institutions. And finally, how non-US managers can leverage Delaware through feeder structures and when it makes sense to do so. Okay, so let's start with some history. Delaware has been the dominant jurisdiction for US business entities for over a century. More than half of all publicly traded companies in America are incorporated there. And when it comes to private funds, Delaware limited partnerships are the reference point. So why is that? There's 3 key reasons. First, case law. Delaware has the deepest, most developed body of law on fiduciary duties, partnership governance, and investor rights. When the legal question comes up, there's usually precedent, and the predictability is invaluable. Second, the Court of Chancery. This is Delaware's specialized business court. The judges are experts in corporate and partnership law. Disputes get resolved by people who actually understand the issues. That's very rare, and LPs know it. Third, enforceability. If something goes wrong in a Delaware fund, LPs have a clear path to enforcement. The legal system works, remedies exist, rights are protected. You put all of these together and you understand why Delaware isn't just a domicile, it's a trust signal. Now let's talk about the LP perspective. When US institutional investors such as endowments, foundations, pensions, or insurance companies see Delaware in your fund documents, something clicks. They're not analyzing it, they're not questioning it, they're just comfortable. Delaware is what they expect. It's what their lawyers expect, it's what their investment committees expect, it's the path of least resistance through internal approval processes. And here's the deeper signal. Delaware tells LPs that you take fiduciary duty seriously. In a Delaware limited partnership, the GP has clear legal obligations to the LPs. Those obligations are defined by decades of case law, and if the GP violates them, LPs have recourse through a court system that knows how to handle it. That's not just legal structure, it's peace of mind. For non-US LPs, Delaware also carries weight, though perhaps not as automatically. They recognize it as the American standard, and many have seen enough Delaware LPAs to know the framework. Bottom line, Delaware is the psychological benchmark of trust. Even if your fund isn't based in Delaware, LPs are comparing your governance to Delaware norms. Now here's something that might surprise you. Even funds domiciled in Cayman, Singapore, or other jurisdictions often model their limited partnership agreements after Delaware. Why is this? Because US institutional investors expect Delaware-style terms, and global LPs have gotten used to them too. So what exactly does Delaware style mean in practice? It means clear definitions of fiduciary duties, what GP owes to the LPs. It means detailed provisions on conflicts of interest, how they're identified, disclosed, and managed. It means specific terms on fees, expenses, and economics, so LPs know exactly what they're paying for. It means governance mechanisms, advisory committees, consent rights, removal provisions. It means clear reporting obligations, what LPs receive, how often, and in what format. When sophisticated LPs review an LPA, regardless of domicile, they're benchmarking it against these Delaware norms. If your terms are weaker or vaguer, they notice, and they ask questions. So even if you're not using a Delaware entity, you should be thinking about Delaware standards. Now, what if you're not based in the United States? Does Delaware still matter? The answer is yes, especially if you're raising from American institutions. Here's the common structure. A non-US manager sets up a Cayman or Singapore master fund for their main vehicle. They then would add a Delaware feeder fund that feeds into the master. The US LPs invest through the Delaware feeder. They get the familiar legal framework, the tax treatment they need, and the governance terms they expect. Non-U.S. LPs invest directly into the master fund or through a parallel offshore vehicle. This master fund structure gives you the best of both worlds. You maintain operational efficiency in your main vehicle while giving U.S. institutions the Delaware wrapper that they want. Is this more complex? Yes, it's more expensive to set up, somewhat. But if you're serious about accessing U.S. institutional capital, it's often worth it and potentially required. The Delaware feeder signals we understand what American LPs need, and we've built for it. So let me give you a clear framework for when Delaware is the right choice. First, you're a US-based manager raising from US institutions. This is the obvious case. Delaware is the default. There's rarely a reason to deviate. Second, you're a non-US manager targeting American institutional capital. If endowments, foundations, or pensions are on your target LP list, a Delaware feeder can make sense for your fund to make it accessible to them. Third, you want the strongest possible governance signal. If you could use another jurisdiction, Delaware tells LPs you're committed to the highest fiduciary standards. Fourth, you anticipate LP scrutiny or complex negotiations. Delaware's deep case law gives both sides a clear framework. Negotiations are more predictable when everyone knows the rules. Fifth, if you're building institutional scale, if your long-term vision involves large institutional allocators, building on a Delaware foundation saves you from restructuring later. If any of these apply to you, Delaware should be in the conversation. Okay, so what are the trade-offs? Of course, Delaware isn't perfect for everyone, so let's talk trade-offs. First, cost and complexity. Setting up and maintaining a Delaware LP, especially as part of a master feeder structure, costs more than a simple offshore vehicle. You need US counsel, potentially registered agent, ongoing compliance. Next, there's tax considerations. For non-US managers and investors, Delaware can create tax complexity. You need to structure carefully to avoid unintended US tax exposure. This is solvable, but it does require planning. Third, it may be overkill for certain fund profiles. If you're running a small, closely held vehicle with family office capital, Delaware's institutional framework might be more than you need. The key is matching your structure to your LP base and your ambitions. Delaware is the right answer for institutional scale funds. It may not be the right answer for everyone. All right, so let's bring it all together. Delaware is the fiduciary gold standard, deep case law, specialized court, enforceable rights. It's the benchmark that LPs, especially US institutions, measure every other jurisdiction against. When LPs see Delaware, they see a commitment to governance and investor protection. That's not just legal structure, it's a trust signal. Even non-US funds often model their LPAs after Delaware terms. And for non-US managers targeting American capital, a Delaware feeder structure opens doors. However, the trade-offs are real. There's cost, complexity, and tax considerations. But if you're building for institutional scale, Delaware is usually worth it. Your structure speaks before you do, and Delaware says that you're playing by the highest standards. All right, that's part 4 done. In part 5, we're headed to Hong Kong, the limited partnership fund and the open-ended fund company structures. I'll break down why Hong Kong has gained traction in Asia, what LPs think about it, when it makes sense as a fund domicile versus a regional hub. Make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell so you don't miss it. Join me on the path to decoding law, technology, and innovation to grow your business. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Until next time.